Okay, hi, I'm going to start the talk. So I'm Shannon Skipper. I'm here talking about backing a model with an API instead of a database. So let's get started. First off, this is an idea that is as old as Rails. Active resource is something that ships under the Rails repository. It never was made part of Rails. But what it does is let you point a model at a Rails app that's remote. It could be localhost, but it could also be like over the web. And it will then use the expected Rails JSON API to over the wire serialize and deserialize and work as expected. So you can here do customer.new, customer.save, or .save, .update, everything you would expect, but it's an API. The downside is that it has to be a Rails JSON API, and that was an edge case enough that it just wasn't flexible enough to get merged into Rails main because not enough people use it. There are plenty of people who use this in prod. It's really useful if you just need a direct connection to another Rails database. So what if you want to go to the basics and make something that's more flexible than active resource? Because you have an API, but it's not a Rails API. It's not a conventional Rails JSON. So if we look at the model, where we can start with the model, it's just a customer class. This really doesn't do anything. So what do the ActiveModel docs have to say about what we can add? We have attribute assignment, attributes, callbacks, conversions, dirty, etc. So one single include will actually get you a pretty large swath of this, and that's ActiveModel model. So when you include ActiveModel model, this is code from that module, it will actually automatically include the attribute assignments, validations, conversion, naming, and translations. So why does it do that? It is for action pack and action view support. So when you're using your model in your view, it knows about the things that Rails needs to know about the model in order to have the automagic parts work. So it does not include the attributes, callbacks, dirty JSON serializers, or the Lint Test. So we'll look at those individually. So let's just get started looking at one of these. First, we'll do attributes. So if we want to add the attributes API to a bare Ruby class, what does that look like? And attributes API is something that's been added in recent Rails. This is a Rails 5 edition, actually as ActiveModel, or active record attributes. Rails 5.2 was when ActiveModel attributes was added. So it's brand new, at least until Rails 6 is out. So this is how you can implement it. So in Rails 5.2, you can just take a bare Ruby class customer, include ActiveModel attributes, and go ahead and set your attributes. These are typed attributes, so we'll see that the name is a string. The age is an integer. So if we go ahead and use this class with no other code in it, just by adding the attributes API, we now can set our age with a setter to a string 42. And it's going to return, when we use the getter, the integer 42. Because under the hood, it's going to do that coercion. Let's go ahead, and I'm going to show some more examples of the attributes API here in this code. Make that a little bigger. So I'm going to use, for an example, Square's customer API. It's one of many Square APIs around supporting businesses. So we have customers, they have preferences, creation time, their birth date, and so let's look at some of these attributes. So we have the ID and creation source, both strings. We have these date times, which come out of the box. Hash and this array of hashes are actually defined by me. So you can take the types that Rails gives you out of the box. You can also create your own types. So also to note, you can set a default, which is the default placeholder. So for all of these string field attributes, I just went through all these fields, and they're just all strings. But we could easily change them to have like a default of an empty string, just like that. Let's take a look real quick at those custom attributes. So that would be in the config initializers, and I created a types.rb file, which is just the convention for where you put your types. And here I have a hash type, and all you have to define is the cast method, taking the value and doing the operation you want to do. So here I'm just taking a hash type just takes the keys and makes some symbols. And then a array of hashes type iterates through an array and maps to symbolized keys too. This was just an example of how you can create your own types. And so if we look back in the customers file, you can see that I just put the type array of hashes. We've defined it, so it's now going to do the coercion when we try to fetch the record. OK. So that's the Attributes API. It's really powerful. It gives you database-like type coercion, but using an arbitrary source for your data. So let's look at the next, the one on the list, callbacks. So this one is one that you also have to implement yourself. It's not automatic, but it is part of the ActiveModel model include, so we get it here out of the box. Basically, the parts you do here is you define the attribute, sorry, not the wrong one. You define the model callbacks that you want to have. So I've defined update and save. And define model callbacks is just given to you by including this module. So let's go down to the update and save implementation in this database. So what you do is you provide a run callbacks and then the one you want. So with save and save bang, we'll do a run callbacks. And then like for update and updated, we have a run callbacks. And what this is going to be is the gut of these methods goes inside of this block. And if you want to put a before save or an after update, it will know that these are the parts that it's the middle. So it's before this block, and it's after this block that the bits will run, but the return value of this block will persist. So this is basically how you implement your own active record style before and after callbacks. So let's go back to the slides. And this is a simple one. It's just conversion. I don't think you can really see here, but my highlighting is insufficient. The conversion is highlighted. So conversion, all you do is include ActiveModel conversion, and it provides two partial path. So this is part of what makes Action Pack and Action View just work. That's really all it does. It also hooks in with I18N, so that's really where the meat of the thing is. ActiveModelDirty. This is a really interesting one. This is another one that you don't just get out of the box. You have to implement yourself. So let's take a quick look at that. So here we've included ActiveModelDirty. And then that out of the box is not going to really do anything. We need to define field will change. And so ActiveModelDirty is going to look at all of your attributes and create a method missing method that ends with will change. When you call that method, it's telling Rails, like the value of this attribute has changed. And so Rails now knows this value is not what it was before. So the other bit that you have to implement is changes, and that will be, I just put this in a helper method called persist, where in Rails, an active record knows if it's been persisted. For this model that we've made, there's nothing that knows it's persisted, so I've set an instance variable. When it's persisted, it sets true. When you, like, say, delete it, it's going to set persisted false. But also call changes applied. And so that just triggers to, that triggers to ActiveModel, telling it, whatever this model was changed to, these changes have been persisted, in this case to an API, normally with Active Record, to a database. So this is pretty neat, because with only these two method calls, we get a whole interface. So let me do a little code demo. OK. So if we do, let's fetch a customer from the API, and hopefully the internet is working here, because this is from Square's API. Yes, it is. Yay, that's amazing. Wow. Didn't expect that to work. Conference Wi-Fi. So this is a customer object. It's a real Rails model. It's backed by Square's API. And if we go ahead and change a value, like let's take the given name, and we'll give it my first name, so Shannon. And let's take the company name, And you'll notice these empty strings would have been nils if I hadn't set the attributes default. So this is the attributes API at work. So with the company name, we'll set that to square. And so if we check c.changes, this is going to give us, just because of those two methods we implemented, this knows that the given name went from Amy to Shannon, and the company name went from an empty string to square. If we now do c.save, this is going to do an update against the API. We can now check the changes and see that there are none because the customer has not changed. Interestingly, we can also, let's set the family name to my last name, Skipper. So we can also do restore, and we can do attributes to restore all attributes, but we could also just restore family name directly. And so now if we check it, the family name is back to Hey. So this is ActiveModelDirty. By just including ActiveModelDirty and saying when something is changed, Rails provides all these helpers out of the box. I didn't even cover all of them, but it gives you just like what you'd expect with active records. That's pretty neat. OK, so back to the slides. So another ActiveModel module that's interesting is the serializers. This is also one that you don't get out of the box. You have to explicitly include, but it just works. There's nothing else that you need to do to set it up. So ActiveModelSerializers without the JSON on the end is something that the JSON one includes. So if you want both, you can just include this one, and you get ActiveModelSerializers and ActiveModelSerializers JSON. So what does ActiveModelSerializers do? It basically lets you convert your model into a hash. Actually really useful. And under the hood, things can use serializable hash as a hook for this. By adding the JSON extension as well, you get 2 JSON, just like you would expect from a Rails model. OK, so let's go on. So validations. This is a useful one. Let's pull out to code demo. So I've only added one validation here because the API actually has all its own validations, but anything we want to handle before we even make the API call can be done here. So I just have a validates email address. By including ActiveModelModel, you get validations. ActiveModelModel really is a drunk drawer of these that is a useful subset that are sort of auto-implemented. So you can just work with it just like you would expect. All the validations just work in traditional Rails fashion. So we can show those off here. Like let's say we try to set the email address to just a plain @ sign. And we can check that this is not valid. And so if we try to save it, it's going to refuse to save. Or save bang, and it's validation error. So validations work just as you would expect. And by including ActiveModelModel, you get them out of the box. So another thing that you get by including ActiveModelModel is naming and translations. So ActiveModel naming, you extend ActiveModel naming, and you can instead include ActiveModelModel. It will, on include, extend it. And this gives you model name name, which again is used by action view. And it also gives you model name.human. Again, this is really only useful for the I18N internationalization element of things. It's not doing a whole lot here, but as you hook in the I18N, these become important. So one other helper that you get from ActiveModelModel is the translations module, which you can extend as well. And it gives you the human attribute name, which is similar to the naming module, except it's for attributes instead of for the module. Again, this is really about internationalization. So the final thing that the ActiveModel implementation has in it is a lint test. And that's actually really awesome. This one you don't actually include in your class. You include in your tests. But let's say we have, this is in our model tests. We include ActiveModel lint tests. And then the one thing that you're supposed to do is set the model instance variable. And the test will take it from there. So if you set this one instance variable, you get 6 runs, 35 assertions, and it shows you that you have one working model. It passes the Rails model specs. By including ActiveModelModel, you should get here. So let's try these out. I just, for this talk, created 2 models. So we should, if my math is right, have something like 12 assertions, and I've gotten rid of the other tests for this, so let's run rake. And there we go, 12 assertions, 70 assertions, 12 runs. So that was 6 runs and 35 assertions each. So that's just a nice way to very quickly get some sanity check that your implementation is a full ActiveModel implementation. It doesn't check any of the active record like helpers, which we can look at next, but it does give you like a basic groundwork. So other things that you might want to look at when implementing your own model is pretty print and inspect, because these are not going to be given to you out of the box by Rails, and it's going to be a real differentiating factor between what your models look like and what a real Rails model looks like. Not that your models aren't real. So pretty print. This is in Ruby core. It actually is now, as of recent Ruby, required by default. So you don't even have to require PP. I think it's been in Rails for a while. But let's take a look at how you can implement that. So in this model, down at the bottom, I've implemented these 2 helper methods. So pretty print, and it has like more details here, and then inspect, and this is just a tighter definition. So for pretty print, we're taking an object address group, which is just, you can look in the pretty print docs. There are basically different ways to do these layouts, and then I'm taking the immutable fields and the regular fields, and then differentiating those slightly by style and color. This is just a convention I came up with because in a regular Rails database, you can change all of the values, whereas if you're going through an API, there may not be a way to change certain values that are readable but not writable. So let's take a look in the REPL at what that looks like. So if we, again, do like customer.new, this is a brand new customer, and you'll see here the purple fields, in this case, are API knowledge that we can't change. The gray fields are our attributes, which we can absolutely change. So let's try changing an attribute. And we see by saving, it now has fetched these immutable fields because under the hood, creating a new customer did nothing with the API. It's purely a Rails model that was spun up. On save, it actually, under the hood, did a create customer through the API. If we now take that customer and change something, the next save will do an update under the hood. So under the hood here, on customer.new, nothing happened with the API. On initial save, a creation happened with the API, and on the subsequent save, an update happened with the API. And the pretty printing throughout is just to give this nicer look at the customer object. For comparison, if we look at the inspected version, let's like print the customer. So here, well, it still returned the pretty version, but above the pretty version, you can see the inspect version. So the inspect version looks less like a Rails model and more just like a standard Ruby class. We actually here have the customer instance, and then I've recreated the object ID, which is something that you can do to match what that object ID really is in Ruby. We'll take a look at that in a second. And then I've added the immutable and regular fields to this inspect. So I really like the pretty print. I mean, I think that these colors are fantastic. I think that the pretty print style is really worth doing. So definitely, if you're doing your own model or even with your service objects, consider implementing pretty print for them to step it up to sort of the Rails level of console interaction. So pretty print implementation here is mostly just about printing those attributes. The inspect is similarly on this line, is about printing the attributes. The next line, let's take a look in a little more detail, and this is just about showing the object ID that Ruby would anyways. So with inspect, when you do an object in Ruby, you get this hex gibberish after the object. So we have hash, open brace, the class name, colon, and then we get this hex number. So what is that hex number? It is actually a relation to the object ID of the class. So in this case, we have like 2.1 billion. If we left shift a bit, you'll notice that's the same operation as timesing it by 2. We get 4.3 billion, roughly. So that hex number there is actually the hex representation of 4.3 billion, and it's the memory location of this object in Ruby. So if you want to implement like additional things, like you're getting back like out of the box here with a customer, we would get back something almost identical to that object.new, where we would just see our customer class like regular, a colon, and this memory address. If we want to add the attributes on, we're going to lose that first bit. And so this is a way to recreate that first bit that you're expecting so you can addendum additional information. So let's look at that one more time as a full string. Basically, inspect here is returning the class. So this is going to be customer. And then it's going to take that object ID of this particular instance, left shift it by a bit, and then format that. This is just using a hex formatter. So I'm just saying, give me a 0, an X, and 18 value places. So by implementing pretty print and inspect, we now have a nice user-friendly REPL interface for our custom class. OK, so in this demo, I am using a new Ruby gem. Square has a Ruby gem called Square Connect, Square_Connect. So you can install that with gem install Square Connect. We also are creating a brand new Ruby gem and then looking at ways to do things like generate or have a Rails engine around models. So you can use our platform as a service and don't have to do all the, should I make a service object? Should I put this in my controllers? Help me get this out of the views. And have some of this work already done. So let me show off real quick some of the things that you can do with this. So let's see, I have Rails running here. So we can go over to a browser and see if the Yep, the internet is working. So this is a controller that was generated off of that model. And although the model has a bunch of weird parts in it and busy work, you can use it from a controller and from a view as though it was a database-backed active record model. So we can here, I'm not a designer. So this is a pretty basic materialize theme. But we can click on these individual records. Like by clicking that, it under the hood is, I mean, like for Rails' convention, it just looks like a regular Rails controller. But under the hood, it just fetched this from the API. If we click to edit, we can like change a name, hit save. This is going to do an update under the hood. We can delete a record. We can do pagination across multiple cursored requests. And basically, we have a working model that we can use to back a Rails app. So let's take a look really quick then at the code that makes this possible. So the model that we've gone through how we included the attributes. We included dirty, the serializers, and then this catch-all ActiveModel model got us the rest of the way there. I've also extended enumerable, and this is, we just have to implement each, and we thereby can get iteration through like all of our customers, as well as helpers like first. And then on this one line, I'm using Square's new Ruby SDK, which we'll be releasing probably by the time this video is published. But here we just give it our token and pull up the customers. So that's really, this is mostly about defining the Rails model rather than like using the API. The API is really just a couple one-liners in here, but it's where all the data comes from. So here, we're just doing the attributes that we discussed, and we've added this persisted, so you can check the persistent state. This is just some additional helpers for active record-like niceties. We can do an attribute method suffix, and basically this means if we have a customer birthday, for example, you can do customer birthday question mark. And that's gonna internally just check public send birthday and check if that field is present. So we can also do regular assignments. So let's take a look at that. And then I also implemented find, all, create, update, delete, and other just active record type helpers. But let's take a look at creation. So we can, I showed already like creating a customer, and then you can subsequently set values. You can also create the customer with values up front and pass them in as an object. You can do the regular setters. You can do like update attributes. Basically, it works as anticipated. And then let's go over to the controller that backs this model for the demo we just looked at. I just have controllers for the two models we generated. And here, I just used an off-the-shelf pagination tool, Pagey, and set our per page for 15. We can just change that to get different pagination. A regular index, I am just doing pagination here, but otherwise, this is exactly like how you would do it with a regular model. And then familiar things like customer find by the params ID and customer new. All this just works. Customer creation is slightly different because I want to be able to get at the API response. And that's something that I think we could refine a bit more. I think some of the ActiveModel stuff is so straightforward that the implementation is extremely clear, whereas how to best do it with Active Record is really more discretion. So you have to decide how do we best expose what the API can do and make it like very similar to what Rails can do. For example, where doesn't make a lot of sense because you don't have a SQL query against an API. But you really might want to provide something else to get at that type of search parameters and queries. Update, also quite similar, but again, we're gonna query the API response, so it's a little bit different than it would be with a regular Rails model. Delete is just exactly identically the same, and same with like customer params. So, and then likewise, in the view, we are going to be able to use things that were like link tos and like a URL, passing in the model as the URL. And because of ActiveModel model, that is actually gonna wire up and work correctly. So, let me go back to the slides. So this squ.re/Ruby is currently pointing at our Square Connect gem. But as we publish our new Ruby SDK, we'll be linking it to that. And if you have any questions or comments, please tweet at us at SquareDev on Twitter. I'm Shannon Skipper. I'm an engineer and evangelist at Square and really happy to be working on our public Ruby infrastructure. So I have time to take some questions if anyone has any. Awesome. And actually, I'll repeat your question because I don't think we have a mic here. I will publish it. It's not, if you want to, I will publish it. I don't have it in a public repo right now, but I will remedy that after the talk. I will tweet out a link to the slides from twitter.com/_HAVENN. I picked the worst Twitter name ever. If the question was, is there a link to the slides? And I will put that out. But yeah, don't start your Twitter name with an underscore because it makes it unsearchable, which I've now gone years with an unsearchable Twitter account. It does not get you many followers, but if you manually type in my name, I promise that really is my account. Yes, so actually, oh, sorry, yes, the question was, how do you handle bulk updates? And actually, the other endpoint that I modeled is our catalog endpoint, and it does have bulk updates. And that poses more of an editorial dilemma for the author, because you absolutely can support it, but you're going a little further off the rails. And I think that's a really interesting point for trying to back a model with something, is like you really need to make sure that it did work for bulk updates, but it's a little bit more alien of an interface. So I think one of the things that is really good to look at for like, should I be doing this? Like I can, but should I be? Is like, do you create it, read it, update it, and delete it? Is it CRUD? If it is, it's a good sign that a model makes sense because you're gonna get all these helpers under the hood. For bulk updates, I mean, I think some of the bulk updates, Rails 6 stuff is implementable. I haven't done that, but I think that would be really interesting to look at, and I'd love to. Okay, so the question was, what else can you use Active Resource for other than JSON APIs? And the answer is nothing. Active Resource is very, very specifically meant for not just a JSON API, but a Rails JSON API. So if you're gonna model, if you have one Rails app and you want to model the Active Record resource from another Rails app, you should not implement your own ActiveModel. You should instead use Active Resource because it does all of this under the hood, it's well tested, it's battle tested, and it's actually a great solution for I need to serialize between two Rails apps. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you all so much.